two men stood at the very edge of human understanding. Not just men of science, but pioneers of the soul, explorers in an uncharted world where reason collided with instinct, and where truth often wore a mask. 1. A trailblazer who cracked open the forbidden doors of sexuality, dreams, and taboo. This was Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, who dared to suggest that our actions were not guided by noble intention, but by repressed desires, fears, and childhood wounds we refused to acknowledge. He gazed into the unconscious, not with hesitation, but with surgical precision, dissecting the psyche as if it were a map drawn in shadow and secrecy. The other, a visionary who peered deeper into myth, archetype, and the mystical layers of the mind. Carl Gustav Jung, part scientist, part mystic. A man who believed the soul was not just a battleground of instincts, but a canvas painted with the symbols of humanity's oldest dreams. For Jung, the unconscious wasn't just personal. It was collective, timeless, and sacred. Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, two names that would become immortal, not only for what they discovered, but for how they clashed. Together, they formed one of the most influential duos in the history of psychology. A mentor and a disciple, a father figure, and a philosophical son. Their ideas, their letters, their admiration burned brightly for a time. And then, it all fell apart. Like a star collapsing into itself, their friendship imploded, leaving behind a trail of silence, bitterness, and two radically different visions of the human mind. But why? What broke the bond between Freud and Jung? Was it simply ideological difference? The slow corrosion of ego? Or was it something far more elusive, something embedded in the very concepts they were trying to define? Perhaps it was their own unconscious minds, those hidden forces they spent their lives studying, that silently unraveled their unity. A strange irony. The very theories they pioneered may have predicted their parting. Maybe it was destined. Maybe it was necessary. This is not just the story of two men. It's the story of a collision between science and spirituality, between the measurable and the mystical, between control and chaos, between Freud's rigid structures and Jung's fluid symbols, between what we think we know about the mind and what we dare not imagine. In this video, we're diving deep, not just into the theories, but into the fragile friendship, the slow-burning fallout, and the irreversible divergence that didn't just separate two men, it reshaped the very foundations of psychology, therapy, and how we understand ourselves today. This is Freud versus Jung, the breaking point between two giants of the subconscious. Section 1. The beginning. Two minds meet. The year was 1907. Europe stood on the brink of modernity, and so too did the human mind. Carl Jung, a young Swiss psychiatrist, with a keen intellect and a thirst for answers, boarded a train from Zurich to Vienna. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels beneath him could not match the anticipation building within. His destination, the elegant, book-lined apartment of Sigmund Freud, already a towering figure in the emerging field of psychology. Jung had devoured Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams like scripture. To him, Freud wasn't merely a theorist, he was a revolutionary. A man unafraid to challenge the moral fabric of society and question the sacred institutions of family, faith, and civilization itself. And when they finally met, something extraordinary happened. Their first conversation was electric, almost mythic. They reportedly spoke for over 13 hours, straight and uninterrupted flow of words, questions, insights, and revelations. No food, no breaks, no fatigue. Just two minds locked in orbit, as if they had waited lifetimes for this moment of recognition. Freud, who had long feared that psychoanalysis might die with him, saw in Jung a beacon of hope, a non-Jewish successor in a time of rising anti-Semitism, someone who could carry the torch of his theories into the halls of respectability, someone who could open doors he never could. Jung, meanwhile, saw in Freud the intellectual father he never had. A man who dared to venture where others feared to tread, who held the keys to the kingdom of the unconscious, and seemed willing to share them. It was more than professional admiration. It was emotional, intense, bordering on spiritual. Their relationship quickly evolved into something deeper than mere collaboration. For 6 years, they wrote each other over 360 letters rich with analysis, affection, and even moments of vulnerability. They challenged one another. They supported each other. And yet, beneath the warmth, a quiet tension was already beginning to stir. Like tectonic plates drifting slowly, apart and seen, but unstoppable. Freud admired Jung's brilliance, but he was wary of Jung's openness to mysticism, religion, and the occult. He feared that Jung's fascination with the spiritual world could undermine the scientific credibility of psychoanalysis. Jung, on the other hand, began to feel constrained by Freud's insistence on sexuality as the root of all neuroses. He sensed there was a deeper language of the psyche, one made not just of lust and trauma, but of symbols, dreams, myths, and ancient truths buried in the soul of humanity. They were two men looking at the same landscape but through very different lenses, and soon, that difference would become a chasm. Section 2. The Foundations. Common Ground. Freud and Jung initially shared a belief that the human psyche could be analyzed through dreams, symptoms, and unconscious desires. Both believed that much of human behavior was not rational, that it was rooted in deeper, hidden forces. They were explorers of the invisible, attempting to map the internal worlds of men and women, at a time when the soul was often left out of scientific inquiry. In their eyes, the unconscious wasn't a vague or mystical idea, was the hidden engine of the human mind. It spoke in symbols, revealed itself in slips of the tongue, surfaced in our fears, and whispered through our dreams. Freud's theory of the unconscious was structured around repressed sexual desires. He argued that childhood experiences, especially those related to sexuality, were the primary drivers of adult neuroses. His model was linear, biological, and deeply rooted in the material world. To Freud, the psyche was a battlefield of instincts. Civilization's demands clashed with primal urges, and repression was the cost of being human. Everything, from a nervous tic to an obsessive thought, could be traced back to the libidinal energy stifled in youth. He reduced complex emotions to biochemical instincts and cultural taboos, finding patterns of pathology in what others might overlook. Jung agreed with much of Freud's early work, especially in understanding the unconscious as a powerful force shaping behavior. In fact, Jung helped spread Freudian theory throughout Europe, especially through his leadership in the burgeoning psychoanalytic movement. He admired Freud's brilliance, and initially saw him as a mentor, perhaps even a father figure. Their correspondence was intense, and intellectually electric minds working in tandem to bring the unconscious into the light. Jung's reputation as Freud's chosen heir made him the face of psychoanalysis beyond Vienna. For a time, it seemed as though they were building a shared temple of understanding, brick by brick, theory by theory. But as Jung began to explore his own ideas, cracks started to form in the intellectual alliance. What began as subtle disagreements soon widened into a philosophical chasm. Jung started to question the narrow scope of Freud's focus on sexuality. He felt that the psyche was not merely a pressure cooker of repressed libido, but a labyrinth of meaning, myth, and mystery. And so, the bond that once united them began to strain under the weight of deeper questions that Freud was not willing to ask. Section 3. Jung's Divergence. A deeper unconscious. Jung didn't believe that the unconscious was merely a container of repressed desires. To him, it was much more a vast ocean that connected all of humanity through shared archetypes, symbols, and myths. He called this the collective unconscious. It wasn't personal, it was universal. Beneath the individual psyche lay a layer of shared psychic material, timeless instinctual patterns that shaped the way humans dreamt, created stories, and experienced the sacred. Jung saw these patterns emerge, not only in clinical cases, but in ancient myths, in religious imagery, and in art from cultures that had never encountered one another. Jung believed that human beings inherited a kind of psychic blueprint, a set of recurring images and patterns he saw in dreams, mythology, art, and religion across cultures. These weren't just fantasies or sexual disguises. They were spiritual truths, psychological structures. The mother, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man. These weren't just characters from stories. They were the deep architecture of the psyche itself. Jung believed that these archetypes lived within us all, guiding our growth, our fears, our transformations. He viewed the journey of life not just as a battle with repression, but as a path toward wholeness, a quest to integrate these archetypal energies and discover the self. To Freud, this was dangerous mysticism. He saw Jung's fascination with mythology, religion, and symbols as a regression into unscientific superstition. He feared that psychology would lose its footing in the realm of objective truth. To him, Jung's theories were drifting too far from the empirical and too close to the spiritual. Freud once wrote, "Wherever my faith falters, you make an invasion, and the shadowy reign of the mystics begins." It was not merely a criticism, it was a line in the sand. Freud wanted to build a science of the mind. Jung wanted to recover its soul. For Freud, psychology needed to remain grounded in science. He saw Jung's ideas as a betrayal of that mission. Jung, on the other hand, felt constrained by Freud's insistence that everything must return to sex. The more Jung explored, the more he felt suffocated by Freud's reductionist lens. He began to see the psyche as not only wounded, but sacred, a place where meaning unfolded, not just pathology. Dreams weren't distortions of forbidden wishes, they were messages from the deep, symbols waiting to be decoded by the soul's own language. In one letter, Jung wrote, "Your psychosexual theory is a creed to you. I must drop this." That sentence marked the beginning of his intellectual emancipation. With those words, Jung stepped away from the shadow of Freud and into his own psychological vision. He would go on to develop one of the most profound and spiritual understandings of the human mind, one that continues to influence psychology, philosophy, art, and religion to this day. Section 4. The Breaking Point. The tension had been building for years, subtle at first, like a quiet undercurrent beneath calm waters, but gradually, it evolved into a deep rift that neither man could ignore. Their friendship, once full of mutual admiration and intellectual excitement, began to show signs of strain as their ideas diverged. The breaking point came during a pivotal trip to the United States in 1909, where both Freud and Jung had been invited to speak at Clark University. It was a momentous occasion, not just for them, but for the international recognition of psychoanalysis. Yet, beneath the surface of applause and academic honor, something far more personal was unraveling. During the trip, Freud suffered 2 physical collapses, both of which deeply unsettled Jung. Though the official cause was listed as fainting due to travel fatigue, Jung sensed that something symbolic was at play. The body, he believed, often speaks the secrets the conscious mind dares not admit. And then came the moment that would permanently fracture their relationship. Jung asked Freud to share and analyze one of his own dreams. It was a simple request, but laden with psychological significance. Freud refused. When Jung pressed further, Freud reportedly responded with a statement that landed like a thunderclap. "I cannot risk my authority." Those 5 words pierced Jung to the core. To him, they were not just a casual comment, they were a revelation. In that moment, Jung saw behind the curtain. Freud was no longer the fearless pioneer of the unconscious, the brave explorer of the human mind. He was, instead, a man fiercely guarding his intellectual fortress, unwilling to let anyone, even a trusted colleague, question its foundation. To Jung, this was a betrayal of everything science stood for. Truth, he believed, must be pursued regardless of personal cost. Authority should serve understanding, not obstruct it. Freud's refusal struck Jung not as caution, but as dogmatism. And from that point onward, their relationship began to unravel like a thread pulled from a tightly woven tapestry. Their once warm and frequent letters turned cold and clinical. The tone shifted from camaraderie to subtle condescension, then to overt challenge. Disagreements became confrontations. Freud clung to the sexual theory of neurosis, while Jung increasingly emphasized spiritual, symbolic, and mythological dimensions of the psyche. Then, in 1912, Jung took a decisive step that would formalize the rupture. He published Psychology of the Unconscious, a bold and controversial work that directly challenged Freud's views on libido, symbolism, and the nature of the unconscious. In this book, Jung argued that the unconscious was not merely a dark basement of repressed desires, but a vast, dynamic realm filled with archetypes, primordial images, and the seeds of human transformation. It was a radical departure. And it marked the birth of his own psychological school, analytical psychology. By 1913, their correspondence ended completely. There were no final words, no dramatic farewells, just silence. The intellectual partnership that had once electrified the field of psychology was over. The split was total. And yet, it was also the beginning of 2 distinct paths to visions of the psyche that would ripple through the 20th century and beyond. Section 5. Aftermath. 2 Legacies. After their break, Freud and Jung never reconciled, but each went on to build monumental legacies in his own right, shaping not only the field of psychology but the very way we understand ourselves. Freud remained firmly rooted in the clinical world. He continued to refine the theory of psychoanalysis, delving deeper into concepts like repression, resistance, transference, and dream symbolism. He developed his model of the mind as a battlefield between the id, ego, and superego, a structure driven by instinct, shaped by experience, and governed by the tension between desire and morality. Freud's vision of the psyche was raw, biological, and deeply influenced by the scientific rationalism of his time. He saw humanity as a species torn between civilization and instinct, ever at war with itself. He also expanded the theory of psychosexual development, charting how childhood experiences and unconscious conflicts shaped adult behavior. Though often criticized and revised over the decades, Freud's theories opened a gateway into the exploration of the inner world, creating the foundation upon which modern psychotherapy was built. For many, Freud remains the father of the talking cure, the man who dared to listen to suffering with seriousness, and who made the couch a sacred space for human vulnerability. Jung, however, took a different path, one that led him far beyond the boundaries of conventional science. After the split, he turned inward. In the wake of the separation, he experienced a profound psychological crisis, what he later described as a descent into the unconscious. Rather than resisting it, Jung embraced this inner journey, documenting it meticulously, in what would become one of the most enigmatic and powerful works in modern psychology, the Red Book. It was not intended for public view. Full of vivid visions, archetypal dialogues, and strange landscapes of the psyche, the book reads like a dream woven into scripture. For decades, the Red Book remained hidden in a Swiss vault. Only in 2009, nearly 50 years after Jung's death, was it finally published. And when it was, it revealed a man who had walked the edge of madness to bring back something sacred, a new map of the soul. Jung's ideas bloomed like wildflowers in places Freud never imagined. He introduced concepts such as introversion and extroversion, the collective unconscious, the shadow, the anima and animus, and individuation, the lifelong process of becoming one's true self. He saw the psyche not as a machine, but as a living mythotheater of gods, symbols, and stories that transcended the personal and reached into the archetypal. His work resonated not only with therapists, but with artists, poets, philosophers, and seekers of all kinds. While Freud analyzed dreams to uncover buried trauma, Jung explored them as messages from the soul. While Freud interpreted religion as a collective neurosis, Jung treated it as a deep, symbolic expression of the human longing for wholeness. He found wisdom in alchemy, guidance in ancient myths, and healing in the symbols that spoke across cultures and centuries. Their legacies became mirror images. Freud stood as the physician of the mind, bringing darkness into the light through careful, rational dissection. Jung emerged as the mystic cartographer, mapping the hidden dimensions of the psyche with wonder and reverence. Freud gave us the tools to understand our wounds. Jung gave us a vision of how those wounds might transform us. In the end, their conflict was not a failure, it was a necessary divergence. For the mind is vast, and no single theory can hold it all. From the ashes of their split, to great traditions arose each, illuminating different corners of the human soul. Section 6. A final reflection. Looking back, the rupture between Freud and Jung wasn't just a disagreement over theory. It was a mirror of their own subconscious fears and unmet needs. It wasn't merely intellectual. It was deeply personal, a psychological drama, unfolding between two of the most brilliant minds in history. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, sought certainty in a world that often seemed chaotic and unpredictable. He needed control, structure, and scientific authority, an anchor against the stormy sea of the unconscious. For him, the psyche had to be dissected with the precision of a scalpel, confined to observable patterns and clinical boundaries. Jung, on the other hand, was drawn to the symbolic, the unseen, the mysterious. He longed for depth, meaning, and spiritual exploration, a journey, not through labs, but through dreams, myths, and archetypes. He saw the unconscious not just as a repository of repressed desires, but as a vast ocean of potential, rich with wisdom, darkness, and divine mystery. Their divergence was inevitable, not out of rivalry, but necessity. It was a split that echoed something far greater than themselves, a universal tension within every human being. It reflects the eternal dance between order and chaos, reason and intuition, science and soul. In truth, their break was not a failure, but a symbolic parting of ways that allowed two great rivers of thought to flow freely, shaping the landscape of modern psychology. And ironically, in their separation, they became even more deeply connected to stars, pulled apart by gravity, yet still orbiting the same psychological universe. You cannot truly understand Freud without Jung, nor Jung without Freud. They were two halves of a deeper whole, each illuminating facets of the human psyche the other could not fully grasp alone. Freud gave us the tools to understand the mechanics of the mind. Jung invited us to explore its meaning. Together, they mapped a terrain that still shapes how we understand ourselves today. And while their personal relationship may have fractured, their intellectual legacies remain intertwined, forever bound in the story of the human soul's search for truth. Their story is not one of defeat, but of necessary divisions so that both science and soul could evolve in their own directions, both essential, both incomplete without the other. Conclusion: if this video gave you a new perspective on the human mind or helped you reflect more deeply on your own inner world, consider subscribing, liking, and leaving a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you lean more toward Freud's realism, his emphasis on the known and measurable? Or do you resonate with Jung's symbolism, his trust in dreams, synchronicity, and the sacred unknown? There's no right or wrong answer, only the beginning of your own exploration. Because in the end, the greatest journeys we take are not across continents or through history books, but within. Into the forgotten corners of our memories, the buried truths of our fears, the radiant visions of our potential. So keep exploring. Keep asking. Keep listening to the voice within that whispers, there is more to discover. And remember, the journey inward is the most courageous path of all. Thanks for watching and, until next time, keep walking the road of self-understanding.